Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. The Roman historians subsequent to Livy, pronounced Sir Ronald Syme in the 20th century, have, quote, perished utterly. Now, it is true that most of the historians who wrote in the century between Livy and Tacitus, whether well known, like Seneca the Elder or the Elder Pliny, or less familiar, such as Servilius Nonianus and Fabius Rusticus, have survived only in fragments, or not at all. But there are two exceptions, Velleius Paterculus and Curtius Rufus. Velleius Paterculus was born in probably 20 or 19 BC and began his career as military tribune around the turn of the millennium under the young grandson of Augustus, Gaius Caesar, in the east. Perhaps in reaction to the trend of ever larger works, which culminated in Livy's monumental 142-book history, Velleius Paterculus wrote a summary history of Rome from its beginnings to 29 AD in two slender volumes. Though we do not know exactly when he began to write, his dedication to the work to Marcus Vinicius, the consul of the year 30 AD, indicates that publication was intended to be in the year of Vinicius's consulship. Despite the slimness of his volumes, an impression exaggerated by the almost total loss of the first of them, Velleius's work ranges extraordinarily widely. Though he becomes more expansive as he reaches his own times, and though in the later parts of his work he concentrates inevitably on the major protagonists, such as Caesar in sections 41 through 59, or Augustus in sections 59 through 93, and Tiberius in sections 94 through 131. In the earlier parts, he treated Greek history as well as Roman, and in digressions or excurses, he provides summary accounts of Roman colonization. This is in Volume 1, sections 14 and 15. Greek and Roman literature, again, Volume 1, 16 through 18. And in other sections 2, 9, 36, 2 through 3, and also of Roman provincialization, sections 38 through 39. The juxtaposed digressions at the end of Book 1, specifically sections 14 through 18, emphasize the break between his first and second volumes, the chronological moment for which is the fall of Carthage in 146 BC. In choosing this event as the decisive development in Rome's history, Velleius follows Sallust, by whose phraseology he was also greatly influenced. But Velleius's general style has none of Sallust's famous jerkiness or abruptness, which he will have eschewed as being too subversive. Though Velleius's history of the Republic is extremely useful, and he often provides information found in no other source, the defining experience of his life and career was his close association with the future Emperor Tiberius on military campaign for 9 continuous years between the years 4 AD and 12 AD. He served under Tiberius in Germany, Pannonia, which is basically modern-day Hungary, and Dalmatia, the Dalmatian coast across from Italy on across the Adriatic Sea from Italy. And he also served as quaestor designate, being put in charge of a special mission for Tiberius in the year 6 AD, which he talks about. At one point, he recalls the enthusiasm with which Tiberius was greeted by veterans in 4 AD after his return from Rhodes 2 years earlier. He says, "I was with you, General, in Armenia. I was in Rhaetia. I was decorated by you almost amongst the Windeliki, and I in Pannonia, and I in Germany." All of these phrases, it is difficult not to believe that these were also the feelings of Velleius himself, who at the time of Augustus's death in 14 AD had been designated praetor along with his brother for the following year. He tells us this. Certainly, his enthusiasm for Tiberius shines out from the pages of his work and seems not to have been dimmed by his later experience in the Senate, to whose ranks he will have been admitted by virtue of his quaestorship. Velleius's career as soldier, senator, and magistrate qualifies him to be described as the kind of historian beloved by Sir Ronald Syme. He says, quote, about him, he had some of the advantages, we might say, of a Sallust or an Asinius Pollio over a Livy or a Festinella, end quote. Yet Syme scorned Velleius's work and has been followed by the majority of modern scholars who, when dealing with Tiberius's Principate, either dismiss Velleius with contempt or fail even to mention him at all. Such practice almost defies belief, though. The years 14 AD through 29 AD are one of the relatively few periods of ancient history for which we have the eyewitness report of a contemporary participant in events, namely Velleius. Velleius's work, though naturally no less rhetorical or partial than that of any other ancient historiographer, should therefore be prized rather than proscribed by modern historians. But his fault is that he puts forward a different view from that of the cynical Tacitus, who we're going to be learning about soon. Tacitus himself acknowledged that malice masquerades as free speech. He says this in his Historiae, Book 1, Chapter 1. And since we are all in favor of free speech, any contrary view to Tacitus's must be damned as servile panegyric, so the logic goes. Velleius's account of Tiberius provides vital evidence for the establishment view of events, while his attitude towards the princeps helps to explain the long survival of the imperial system of government. It would nevertheless be mistaken to suppose that the darker developments of Tiberius's Principate left no mark on Velleius's text. His treatment of Sejanus, for instance, in sections 127 to 28, so far from being a facile eulogy of the man, is an uneasy defense of the emperor's promotion of an unpopular helper. And the narrative ends not, as might have been expected, on a climactic note, but with an anguished summary of treason and death. This is section 130. And an anxious prayer for the preservation of things, section 131. So as with Tacitus, we have to read between the lines, a procedure for which, in the case of Velleius, most modern historians have shown conspicuous reluctance. Now, regarding the other historian from this time, Quintus Curtius Rufus, there is dispute over Curtius's identity, and hence over his dates. But many scholars assume that he is the Curtius Rufus, whose vision of a ghost is reported by the younger Pliny in a famous letter, which you see on the screen here, and you can pause and read that, and also by Tacitus in his Annales under the year 47 AD. Again, you can pause and read that. I will not right now. This man was suffect consul in AD 43, and later, as the ghost had allegedly predicted, he was proconsul of Africa, where he died. A man of the same name, who is mentioned as a rhetorician by Suetonius, is likely to be identical with the visionary, and hence also with the historian. Curtius's claim to literary fame rests upon his history of Alexander the Great, written originally in 10 books, but now lacking books 1 through 2 and parts of books 5, 6, and 10. That the young Macedonian conqueror exercised a fascination upon the Romans is clear from Livy's famous Alexander digression in Book 9, sections 17 through 19 of his history. Likewise from the Suasoriae of the elder Seneca, in which Alexander features in Suasoria 1 and 4, and from Alexander's imitation by numerous politicians and emperors, not least of which was Gnaeus Pompey, who liked to style himself Magnus the Great in imitation of Alexander. He even took to fashion himself as the Roman Alexander. When Catullus, the poet, in poem 11 begins his travelogue with India and ends it with Great Caesar, Caesarus Magni, his contemporary readers will have also appreciated instantly that allusion was being made to Alexander Magnus. Alexandrus Magnus, who was famous for having reached India and for being called the Great. Curtius's narrative was likewise designed to appeal to an established Alexander tradition, therefore. Curtius's work is invariably described as Livian and rhetorical, the latter a prelude to its summary dismissal. What these terms mean, though, and whether they are justified, may be seen from a representative passage. And so we're going to do a bit of a close reading of just one small section about that comes from Alexander's siege of the island city of Tyre. Tyre was taken, Quintus Curtius Rufus says, Tyre was taken in the 7th month after it had started to be attacked, a city outstanding in the memory of posterity, both for its origin's antiquity and for the frequent variety of its fortune. Founded by Agenor, for a long time it imposed its jurisdiction not only on the neighboring sea, but on whichever one its fleets reached. And, if there is attraction in believing the legend, this people was the first either to teach or to learn writing. Its colonies, at least, were spread over almost all the world. Carthage in Africa, in Boeotia, Thebes, Cadiz by the ocean. I believe that as they crisscrossed the open sea, and quite often reaching lands unknown to everyone else, they chose settlements for their young men, who abounded at the time, or else its inhabitants, because they were worn out with the frequent earthquakes, for this too is reported, were compelled to seek by arms new and foreign homes for themselves. Having experienced then many circumstances, and being reborn after its destruction, now at last the city, given the general revival of the long peace, rests under the protection of Roman humaneness. This is the conclusion of Curtius's well-known description of the siege of Tyre, which took place in the year 332 BC. After an opening sentence derived from Livy, Book 21, Chapter 15, quote, in the 8th month after it had started to be attacked, Saguntum was taken. After this opening sentence on the duration of the siege, Curtius appends an appositional phrase in the manner again of Livy, to describe the city's outstanding reputation, ad memoriam insignis, this phrase that he uses here. You can see on the left-hand side there, this phrase meaning outstanding in the memory of posterity. And that phrase is used twice by Livy, in Book 7, Chapter 28, and in Book 24, Chapter 49. Two reasons are given by Curtius, of which the second, the frequent variety of its fortune, is surely intended to remind the reader that fluctuating fortunes are the essence of historiographical narrative. The classic articulation of this principle is found in a letter of Cicero to a friend of his who is going to be writing up the history of his consul of his time, and both during his consulship and afterwards. And Cicero says, yes, I went through so many different ups and downs. You can begin it with the conspiracy of Catiline in 63, and you can take it all the way through to my return from exile, because, he says, nothing tends more to the reader's enjoyment than varieties of circumstance and vicissitudes of fortune. For myself, though far from desirable in the living, they will be pleasant in the reading. For there is something agreeable in the secure recollection of bygone unhappiness. For others, who went through no personal distress, and painlessly survey misfortunes not their own, even the emotion of pity is enjoyable. Which of us is not affected pleasurably, along with the sentiment of compassion, at the story of the dying Epaminondas on the field of Mantinea, ordering the javelin to be plucked from his body, only after he had been told in answer to his question that his shield was safe, so that even in the agony of his wound he could meet an honorable death with mind at ease? Whose sympathies are not aroused and held as he reads of Themistocles' flight and death, The actual chronological record of events exercises no very powerful fascination upon us. It is like the recital of an almanac, but in the doubtful and various fortunes of an outstanding individual, we often find surprise and suspense, joy and distress, hope and fear, and if they are rounded off by a notable conclusion, our minds, as we read, are filled with the liveliest gratification. Thus, Curtius begins the passage by making it clear that he is about to praise the city of Tyre. Now, Quintilian, the professor of rhetoric, who was a much younger contemporary of Curtius, observes in his discussion of how to praise that, quote, cities are praised in the same way as men. The founder takes the place of the parent, and antiquity, vetustas, carries great authority, end quote. This is found in Quintilian's work, uh, De Oratoria, De Institutione Oratoria, Book 3, Chapter 7, 26. The reference to antiquity at once explains the eulogistic nature of vetustate originis, its origins, antiquity, in Curtius's opening sentence, which in turn is explained by Tyre's foundation by Agenor at the start of the next sentence, Agenor taking the place of the parent, as it were, in Quintilian's formulation. Curtius then reports the story of Tyre's pioneering role, prima, in the development of writing. This conforms exactly to the notion that, quote, what most pleases an audience is the celebration of deeds which our hero was the first primus to perform, end quote. That is found in Quintilian, Book 3, Chapter 7, 16. The story of priority is enhanced by the qualification suggested in this phrase, si famae libet credere, if there is attraction in believing the legend, which itself is expressed in Livian language. That phrase, libet credere, it pleases to believe, occurs 5 times in Livy. The widespread diffusion of Tyrian colonies from Boeotia to Cadiz in Spain perhaps alludes to the panegyrical commonplace that the hero rules from east to west. Likewise, the opening up of previously unknown territory is a well-worn motif of panegyric. Curtius offers 2 suggested reasons for tyranny colonization. The first is expressed in Livian language, juventute abundante, with young men abounding, a phrase that we find in Livy, Book 23, Chapter 49. While the parenthesis in the second is also Livian, especially this phrase, for that too is reported nam id quoque traditor, that is found in Book 1, Chapter 31 of Livy. And very similarly, Book 2 of Livy, Chapter 18, id quoque enim traditor, this also is reported. The passage as a whole, therefore, is then concluded by a sentence which looks back to the first, the metaphor of rebirth, renata, which recalls Livy, Book 6, Chapter 1, renatae urbis, the city reborn, while that of resting, acquiescet, recalls Livy, Book 5, Chapter 23, acquiesceret civitas, the state might rest. Therefore, the evidence of this passage fully supports the standard view of Curtius. He exhibits even more indebtedness to Livy than scholars have recognized. And not only is he rhetorical, but he also actually follows the rules of rhetoric as set down by a professor of the subject, namely Quintilian. Neither feature is ground for blame. In the ancient world, the writing of history was a literary pursuit. It was a genre. So it is as normal for Curtius to imitate Livy as it is for Virgil to, say, imitate Homer. Livy's 142 volumes were the preeminent product of an earlier historiography, and it would be strange indeed if a first-century historian were not thoroughly acquainted with and anxious to display his admiration for Livy's masterpiece. In conclusion, then, we can say that as for rhetorical, this is as for the idea that he is a merely rhetorical author, this is a much abused term in modern discussions of ancient historians, and it acquires added piquancy in Curtius's case, if he was indeed a professional rhetorician. Yet Curtius is, of course, no different from other ancient historians, all of whom were rhetorical. His final words on Tyre that we've quoted here amount to an obituary notice for the city, and he should no more be condemned for this and similar flourishes than, say, Tacitus, who we will meet in the next lecture, who in his histories writes an obituary for the capital city of Rome.